All right. Good afternoon. Hopefully you all are enjoying the conference, but I'm Vanessa Johnson, and my presentation is building inclusive Jetpack Compose apps, leveraging Kotlin and the accessibility scanner. So a little bit about me is that I'm an Android engineer at the New York Times, and I work there on the Games app. So if you ever heard of like Wordle, Connections, we work on the app that houses those games. And I've been there for a little bit under a year now. It'll be a year in August. So I'm passionate about creating inclusive and user-friendly apps. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about why accessibility is important, about navigational cues, Kotlin-based semantics, common accessibility pitfalls, and we're going to walk through an accessibility scanner demo. So from the Android accessibility documentation, about 15% of the world population have some type of disability. So that accounts for about 1 billion people. So for apps that are not inclusive, you're kind of missing out on this subgroup of the market that isn't being included or addressed. And then many countries now even require all products used by government employees to be accessible. So taking these steps to make your app more accessible can increase your app's reach and the amount of users that aren't in your current target group. So how many people in the audience either like to travel the world or travel to get here? Okay, almost everyone. So we're gonna go through kind of like a story-based walkthrough. So we have Jen. She has a visual impairment, but similarly, she wants to travel the world, experience new cultures, meet new people, and just enjoy different experiences as a whole. With that, you need to find a good price flight, a good hotel around the things or like places on your itinerary that you want to see, and then just being able to navigate the city as a whole while you're there. So now for anyone that doesn't have a disability, it may be easier to book all these details you need for your trip, and it most likely won't matter the app that you book them with. Well, making sure that it's at least somewhat usable. But however, for Jen, she'll have to be more selective of what app she uses to set up her trip because she has to think about how accessible it is and how easy it is for her to make all these plans. So going off of that, why exactly is accessibility important? There are these web content accessibility guidelines that act as a single shared standard that is used to meet the needs of individuals, organizations, and the government internationally. So while these are made for like web content, it's also crucial in mobile app development. The principals like need special attention on like smaller screens and touch interfaces, so which is why they should be considered and incorporated into your app development. So we start off with perceivable, so not invisible to all your senses. So in Jen's case, if your app requires you to see the screen and there's no other way that you can use it, then it isn't accessible to her. Similarly, for operable, it shouldn't require interaction that your user can't perform. So same thing, like if you need to see the screen and there isn't any other tool you can use to navigate the app, then there's something that you need to work on in your development. Understandable, which is just easy to interpret, and then robust is content should remain accessible. So thinking about like if people need to increase their display size or their font size, or just like maybe like rotating your phone or your like device, just making sure that the configuration changes keep your app remains accessible. So we're trying to ensure that as many people as possible can use technology, which is including people with all abilities, a full spectrum of needs. So when we take these things into account, we're making the user experience better for all its users and not just people with disabilities. So I don't know if many of you maybe if you're outside and you can't really see your screen because of the sun, even though that's like not the biggest problem in your situation, but just making sure that if your app is more accessible for everyone, those are like situations you can still use your app even though you can't see the screen. So we know that people are using technology, they're interacting with their devices. So there are these things called tools called screen readers, kind of like TalkBack. If you are like an Android developer, you've probably used it before for testing. So those read the contents of the screen out loud to the user, something that Jen might actually use a lot. She'll utilize the navigational cues that are provided by TalkBack. But what exactly are navigational cues, right? So these help the user throughout the interface. So they're usually visual and auditory. So there are signals that help people understand where they are and how to move around the app. So you can think about being able to navigate your app in a logical order. So this can include how focus moves from one interactive element to another and how headings and lists are read in a meaningful sequence. So this is an example of a bad settings screen. So it's kind of not intuitive why like the settings word is in red, why it's in caps, and why like notifications is blue, it's a smaller text. And then I don't know if most of you can even see what the third one says, but it says dark mode. So that just shows like the text contrast between like the color of your letters and the background makes a whole lot of a difference because it's not even readable. And then for location services, there's no reason it is a button. So it should be text because it kind of needs to follow, more cohesive format. And then for the actions that can be taking place, some of them are toggle buttons and one's a checkbox. So it's kind of not following like the consistent layout. So they can cause confusion for a user. So with that, we noticed that there is inconsistent color palette, so the colors don't actually mean anything in that situation. Random or crowded layout, so each row is kind of not aligned either left or right, so it's kind of weird to look at as a whole. Then we have unclear labels, and then inconsistent or confusing controls. So that's just like the different actions that can be taking place, even though all of them will be, in a sense, doing the same thing by enabling or disabling one of the features. So a good example, which is probably one that you've probably seen in other apps, kind of similar to this, where you have kind of like these subheadings of like notifications, dark mode, location services. They're all the same size, all the same font and color, and they're easily readable. And then there's some subtext under each one where it gives you some more information of what will happen when you turn it on or off based on the toggle button, which each of them have the same type of action that can be taking place. So we see that there's a clear visual hierarchy, descriptive and informative labels. So that's the subtext, just to make sure you have some more information of what's going to be done when you enable or disable something. And then we have familiar controls, and then with all of that, we're keeping accessibility in mind. So while visual layouts are essential for most users, accessibility semantics helps screen readers and other assistive technologies to interpret the meaning of UI elements and guide users accordingly. So which we can see would be an additive piece to people similar to Jen. So you can kind of think of it as a bridge between UI elements and accessibility features. So we're going to be looking at semantics tree, semantics modifier, common mistakes, and best practices. So let's take this small piece of UI that includes the destination name. So we're kind of sticking with the idea that Jen wants to travel the world. So she's using an app where this is one of the possible locations that she can take. So it has a text, a picture, and a checkbox. So this would be like a potential destination in an app, and it will be the subject of the next few slides when we talk about semantics and the semantics tree. So for the semantics tree, if you haven't worked with it, it's generated alongside the UI hierarchy and describes the hierarchy. So it kind of describes the UI in an alternative manner that is understandable for accessibility services. So these services use the tree to describe the app to users with a specific need. So similarly, you would have like a submit button, and then for TalkBack or any other screen reader, it would be spoken as submit button, email text field, so the person would know what type of information is going in that text field, volume slider, and then a select checkbox, or if it wasn't selected, unselect a checkbox. So just going into a few attributes that may be important for when we look at the semantics tree that you can find in like Android Studio for that piece of UI that we just saw. We have role, so it's the purpose of a UI element. So just a button, an image. So this image I actually had AI make. It's supposed to be like an Android engineer minion. So that was the best one I can come up with. And then we have a checkbox, so these are just checked off. And then just looking at some code, usually when you're not using traditional composables or components, you have to make sure that you set a role to make sure that when TalkBack or other screen readers are reading it, it will specify that it is a button, and the user will know that there's a clickable action that can be done. And then also for an accessibility action, these are specific actions that a user can perform on a UI element. Your app communicates them to accessibility features, so things like clicking, scrolling, or dismissing like any notifications, depending on what comes up on your phone screen. So here is thus a semantics tree, or each like a different part of each one for the UI that we showed before. So this is the row, and we have our content description, we have merge semantics and declarative semantics. So the content description is just the description that's read out to a user when they're looking at your screen, or like if it's in focus. And then we have declared semantics, which are explicit semantics properties declared directly in the composable using the modifier. It comes from composable itself, and it's what you would explicitly define for accessibility or testing. And then with declared merge semantics, the nodes like own declared semantics and any child node semantics that should be merged up the tree. So it would be including like the parent and their children. So you can kind of think of it as like a summary of what this component and its children mean to accessibility services. And you can use them to group smaller UI elements into a single accessibility item. Here we have the text. So usually for text, it's just spoken out as exactly what it is. So for the UI that we had before, we'll just say Jamaica. And then we have an image. So for this one, For this one, we have the content description, like I said before. It will actually show if it's in focus or not. And then we have the role, which is like an image. So for the screen readers, the person would know if it's an image or not. And then like different actions that can take place. We have our checkbox, similar like merge semantics. The only thing that's a little bit different here is that we also have a state description and a toggleable state. So we know if it's on or off. And then the state description, kind of similar to the content description, where it's going to be spoken out to the user, but it just says like the state of which the checkbox is in, so if it's checked or not. And then this is just like the screenshot of declared semantics. So all of this is available in your Android Studio, if you use Android Studio, when you're like looking at your emulator. And there's like some settings on the side that you can enable. Okay, so going into the semantics modifier, it lets you customize what information is exposed. So you can think of like labels, roles, states, and available actions. So semantics give meaning to a piece of UI or an element. So here is how you would actually write it in code, in Kotlin, and then you'd be able to set your content description, which is what we saw in the previous few slides. And for this one, it would be potential travel destination, which is Jamaica. Then we have the checkbox, where this one, all I set was the state description, just to make sure that the user would know if the place that they're looking at or is in focus at the time is selected or not selected. So now we're going to go into common accessibility pitfalls. So we're going to be looking at insufficient color contrast, small touch targets, and missing or inadequate labels. So, does anyone have trouble? I guess it looks a little bit better up on the screen, but does anyone have any trouble seeing what is said on the little white strip? Okay, a few people. So, the idea was to have it like kind of very hard to see. So, for an app or on your phone, especially if it has like a white background, you can see that the contrast between the color of the text and the background is not high enough for most people to see. So this can cause like eye strain, which is not something we want for your user to experience when using your app, because they would probably be frustrated when and be able and want to go to another app to, get the same job done. So in this case, if they're using a travel app, you already have some added stress when you're trying to find the exact details of the flight, the hotel. And if there's like added complexity or like struggles when using it, you'll probably just go to a different app. And then similar here, we have small touch targets. So here we just have like 2 buttons, just random images that you can find in Android Studio. I blew them up so you can actually see what they are. But in actuality, this is like more a better depiction of what they look like on your screen. So they're pretty small, they're close together. And then kind of think of like, you're trying to click on one of the buttons, right? Some people have bigger fingers, bigger hands, or motor impairments. So you might actually click on one button when you intended to click on another button, and that will also cause extra frustration for your user. And then for missing or inadequate labels, you kind of have an image. So just the data structures and algorithms, and probably most people already know about. But here, it doesn't have a content description. It would be spoken from a screen reader as unlabeled. So that might actually also cause more confusion to your user as well, especially if it's an image that they need to know what is being depicted inside. So, excuse me. Then going into common mistakes, we have, if you're setting both a state description and a content description, so if you're actually using like manual testing, and you're gonna notice that these are spoken right after each other. So if you're kind of trying to use the same type of information for both, it can kind of also add like kind of friction or more confusion for the user. So the best thing to do for this is to just use one of them, and then make sure the information that you're trying to use both of them for can just be used in one. So you can just say if the place or whatever the situation is, if it's selected or not selected. Here we have insufficient descriptions. This could be a little bit different, but we set a content description for the image. But if the image is purely decorative and it's not needed for the user to know what it is probably better for you to set your image content description as null. That's very situational though, because like I said before, you probably wouldn't want to do this in most cases. But if you are using things like merge semantics, like we kind of touched on before, if an image is like in some type of composable, if it's like a row or a box, you can kind of merge them up together, and the image it wouldn't be spoken to the screen reader because it would be most likely either spoken as null or unlabeled. Then we have overuse of default semantics. So there are default functionalities when it comes to the screen readers, kind of like making sure that the user know that something is a button, or something's an image, or like a checkbox or a radio button. But those most of the time are not enough when it comes to like going through your app. So that's making sure that you give extra information to the user to make sure that they know of like the state of what something's in. Okay, now we're going to best practices. So as a whole, for the row, I just set the whole semantics for the row itself, including like the text and the image and the checkbox. So when you click on it or click on any part of the row, it will check off the checkbox instead of trying to like go through and make sure you're on the checkbox itself, like it's in focus. So just kind of making it easier for the user to like use your app and actually get the job done and selecting the right location that they want to go to. Similar, we saw this code already, but for the role, since I'm not using a traditional button for this example, for the box, I make sure that I'm setting the role to make sure that the user can click on it and do some type of action, whether it be go to a next page, mark something as selected, or have an alert pop up on the screen, depending on what your use case is. Okay, so after looking at some common mistakes and what best practices look like, there are some tools and testing types that you can utilize to help you write more accessible apps. So we have manual testing, which includes talkback. So when you yourself can put yourself in your user's shoes and step through your app using talkback to see what is being explained to your user, what isn't being explained, and to be able to identify where changes need to be made. And then we also have automated testing, like the accessibility scanner, which we're going to go through in the next few slides. So for the accessibility scanner, for anyone that has never used it or doesn't know what it is, it's a tool that scans the UI and provides suggestions to improve its accessibility, like small touch targets, missing or inadequate labels, and insufficient color contrast, like we went through before. And it helps you identify those common issues in your app. So we have here, hold on one second. Okay, so this is kind of like a small travel part of an app where you'd be able to book your hotel and book your check-in date. So for the first screen, when you're running your accessibility scanner, you can either record your app as a whole or take snapshots. So the snapshots will take a picture of the screen and then pinpoint where things need to be fixed. So for the text on this screen, it is hard to read for here since the font or the color of the font is the contrast is not high enough. So for the accessibility scanner, it tells you what the current contrast is and what it should be. So according to like the Android accessibility documentation, your contrast should always be 4.5 or 4.50. So for this one, it's the text color of the contrast. So now if we kind of back out of this and go to pick one of the destinations, here there are going to be a lot more issues when it comes to the snapshot. But for the radio button, since I didn't give any extra information for each radio button, it kind of gives you the information here that there are multiple items with the same description, and that's not something you want because it will be harder for the person to know which radio button is for which hotel or which date, or depending on the situation for your app itself. So that just shows that there should be some type of extra step that either you can group these together or change the content description of these in some way. And then with the next few of these, it's kind of like the same thing as before, where the text contrast is not high enough for our user to see. Some of these colors you probably won't use in development, but say some of the ones that are gray, those are probably more popular. And then for this button, since it's an image, it's not gonna be spoken out for your screen reader. So that is another scenario where you need to say next button. So for the screen reader, it will just say that it is a button versus what the functionality is. So just be mindful of if you are using images on your buttons that you take that extra step. And then we select a hotel and we go to the next page. But this is a similar thing for your check-in date. Just stepping through the same type of issues of having the same content descriptions and the color contrast for each of these texts. Okay, so for talkback, the way that it's going to be spoken to the user is not selected radio button, double tap to toggle. So kind of seeing how this lack of information isn't very informative for the user. And then similar thing for the hotel, it will just say the hotel and not if it's been selected or not. And then also for the date is a similar thing where it's not selected, radio button, and then saying at the date exactly what it is. Okay, and then for the talkback step through, I know the audio wouldn't show up, so it's just gonna show like how inefficient it actually is to step through a page if you don't group things together or merge them up together. So the more efficient your app could be is the faster that someone can actually get the job done. So after a while of doing this, someone might be like, okay, I'm just gonna go to the next thing. Or go to the next app, I should say. And then one issue when looking at that, so this screen, you have a small button here. And if you see that I was trying to click it, let me like rewind. I'm trying to click it, but since the buttons are so close together and that button had a smaller touch target size, so according to like documentation, like touch target size should at least be 48 dp. For that button, it was about 30 or even less. So that I was trying to click one button, I went back to this other button, or like back in the user experience. So that causes like more friction and annoyance for the user. Okay, so this video is showing like after the fix. So just making sure that we go through each screen to make sure there are no suggestions, and then making sure that we took care of all of the suggestions that we found before. So for this one, all the words or the text are the same color, and I changed the description for the radio buttons, which we're gonna see later on. And then for the last screen, we didn't have any suggestions in the first place, so that should still remain like the same case. Okay, so the fix was that we merged the descendants or all the parent and child components. So it will say like if something is selected or not. So selected like the hotel name or selected date. So like Hotel Four Seasons is not selected, and then Sunday, May 4th was not selected as well. And then this video will show how more efficient it is to step through your app. So you kind of see that how the radio button and the name of the hotel are grouped together, and then you can tap on that area in order to select or enable your choice instead of having to try to, double tap on the radio button itself. Okay, so then we go to the next page, and similarly, we have the date. So just like kind of stepping through again, seeing that these are grouped together, and it's more efficient to actually get to the date that you intended to get to. For the last page, there wasn't much here. It just tells you like your trip summary, and then when you get to the bottom, you can submit the information that you chose and be able to see that your hotel has been booked. So obviously, like for a real travel app, there would be a lot more steps like your checkout day and putting in your payment details. But this is just an example of how the little things that you can contribute to development that can enhance your user experience. So for manual testing and automated testing, so I wouldn't say it's enough to rely on automated testing, because it will pinpoint those few things that we looked at before, like the small touch targets, content description, and things like that. But I think it's better if you just step into the user's shoes and actually do the manual testing and see if you can step through your app. So it would be you as a developer, your coworkers, or maybe even higher ups. One good example that I saw recently is that if you can step through your app with your screen being black and not being able to see what's on the screen, and actually still go through the intended actions, then your app can be very accessible. But if you can't do that, then you got some extra work to do. So I would say that if you incorporate it from the beginning, like in development, it's easier than waiting till the end. So when we look at inclusive design, performance and adaptability and accessibility, if you think about for inclusive design, just making sure that when you are looking at the colors that you use, the sizes that you use, and then making sure that that design works for different device sizes, and just different devices that as a whole. So for like tablets, Samsung Pixels, whatever the case may be, just make sure that you kind of keep that all in mind from the beginning. And then for performance and adaptability, so we kind of touched on it in the beginning, but like say if you have different font sizes or display sizes, then especially for like different phone sizes, everything should still be readable, everything should still be accessible and touchable. And I think for a few apps that I've used before, like increasing your font size, you can no longer see what the button even says. So I feel like that is important in itself, especially when you're trying to grab more users to use your app. And I know that a lot of this is like, for business purposes, trying to get more people to be on your app and stuff like that. But I think it's more like a right thing to do to make sure everyone feels inclusive and, in another way, like kind of more catered to make sure like they feel like, you are doing things or making strides to make sure that they feel like they can use your app. So these are some resources that I use to do this talk. Like for the principles for accessibility is like POUR. That like I said before, it's more for like web content, but it can be attributed to or used in mobile app development. You can build accessible apps. That's just like the Android documentation. Similarly for the Android accessibility overview, and then sizing recommendations for touch sizes, which is the 48 dp. Thanks for listening. I do have a newsletter if you're interested in seeing what I do outside of work. LinkedIn, I don't really post, but if you want to connect, that's fine too. And then also for just going through like more accessibility things and being able to identify them, having another tool. Trying to work on open source, like linter. If you're interested in like contributing to it when it does go live, feel free to like fill out the form. And then feel free to vote, and then I'm open for questions.